Once again, thank you. All right, we can get started on session 4 of World History. Everyone, welcome to the fourth session. Today we'll be learning about the spread of Islam. So keep in mind this is still in the first time period, the 1200 to 1450, which is the post-classical era. And during this time, religion and trade really boomed, and it was a really important part of the history then. So let's get started. So we want to talk about Arabia before Muhammad. So there were pastoral nomads, which were the Bedouins, farmers, the oasis, and they depended on each other. It was a very well integrated society. There was tribal society, and caravan trade was considered very, very important. This was also involved in trade networks in the Mediterranean, the Middle East, East Africa, and India. So Mecca was also a major economic and religious center as it is today, and Arab tribes under political influence of the Byzantine and Sassanid Empire. So keep in mind that the Byzantine Empire was Christian and the Sassanid Empire was Zoroastrian, while these areas that we just stated are all Islamic. This is a quick map of the Byzantine and Sassanid Empire that you can look at. It's the Zoroastrian, Byzantines are right around here, and then Zoroastrianism. So now moving on to the Prophet Muhammad's life and teaching. So Muhammad was a former merchant, and he began to have revelations by the Archangel Gabriel. So the main features of his life and teaching include that Arab descent was traced to Ishmael, which is Abraham's son. The religion was strictly monotheistic. There was a promise of heaven after death, and there were 5 distinct pillars: fasting, prayer 5 times a day, almsgiving, confession of faith, and pilgrimage to Mecca. And this was also considered a universal religion, or egalitarianism. So the elite in Mecca forced Muhammad to flee to Medina in 622 CE, which was the beginning of the Muslim calendar. So I'll give you a couple minutes to answer these questions. You can type them in the chat, you can put them in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and I can click the button that allows you to talk, but I'll give you a couple minutes to think about this question and think about the possible answers. It says to describe the origins of Islam, where and when was it created, what geographic features had an impact on it, we haven't gone over that yet, and what other cultures impacted Islam and how, and what are the main beliefs. So just a quick check. Accept any answers, whatever you think. We haven't really gone into the details of this yet, but any ideas that you might have, go ahead and put them out. Got one answer so far. You can go ahead, you can put it in the chat if you would like to. You can go ahead and raise your hand if you want to. That's in the participants tab, by the way. Make sure to keep it up if you decide to do that for a couple seconds so I can find you. Think about what we talked about before with Zoroastrianism and the Byzantine Empire and the Sassanid Empire right around that area. Think about, like it said, the geographic location of the Middle East of Islam. I'll give you another minute to think about it. Okay, so I got two answers. Somebody said the origin is the Arabian Peninsula and they believe in a heaven after death. That's correct. The origin is in the Arabian Peninsula. They do believe in a few other things than heaven after death. We went over that, like the 5 pillars. I can go back if you want, but that is correct. And someone else said Judaism, which is also correct. So the origins of Islam were rooted in Judaism because Judaism was really like one of the first monotheistic religions. Christianity stemmed from Judaism. Islam stemmed from Judaism. Was one of the first monotheistic religions. So good job on that. Let's continue. So the Muslim expansion happened when Muhammad united the Arab tribes and conquered Mecca in 630. He just died 2 years later in 632 CE. And the first four successors, or in this case, they're called the caliphs. We'll go over that in just a little bit. They expanded the territory to the Middle East, to North Africa, and Persia. Does anyone know what country Persia is now? It used to be called Persia, but now there's a different name for the country. Does anyone know what it is? One person said Iran. That is correct. Persia is now Iran. Yes, you're correct. It is now Iran. So the caliphs were that's where Islam expanded to: Middle East, North Africa, and what is currently Iran. So the caliphs were the leaders of all Muslims, political and religious, which means that this is a theocracy. A theocracy is basically a form of government, like you've heard of democracy and things like that. Theocracy is where the government is based off of religion. In this case, it's based off of Islam. So they called this whole Islamic state. They call this whole Islamic state as part of a theocracy. So during this time, success was possible not just because of the exhausting war between Persia, or what's now Iran, and the Byzantium, which is the Christian Empire. It motivated soldiers. It had really good military leadership and in different population. So quarrels over the succession in the caliphs or the government led to a split into Sunni and Shia, which Shia was the followers of Ali. So Sunni and Shia were based on our two sects of Islam, and each one follows a different successor to the caliphs. So Shia was mostly in Persia and in southern Iraq, like Iran and Iraq, and Sunni is just the majority of Muslims everywhere else. All right. This is a map of Muslim expansion. So the entire Muslim state in this time is called the Dar al-Islam. It's called the Dar al-Islam, and that was the entire the entire theocratic state, everything that was ruled by Islam, which includes Arabia, Anatolia, as it's shown here, Persia, Northern Africa. Oh, sorry. So here you can see it identifies the conquest at the death of Muhammad and the conquest of the first four caliphs, which still stays around the Middle East, Northeast Africa. And then they have the Umayyad caliphs, which extends a little bit further into the Indus River Valley, goes into Spain, and it stays in northwestern Africa. And these are the boundaries of the caliphate. This is the Byzantine Empire, by the way. That's the Christian empire. Next was the Umayyad dynasty, which was 652 to 750 CE, which was the capital of this was in Damascus, and they had many wars against the Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire. This included the conquest of Spain, and further advances were just stopped by the Franks in 732. So Arabic was the official language of the government, as it was in most areas in the Dar al-Islam, and conversions were encouraged. So non-Muslims had to pay a special head tax, but were not forced to convert, and Judaism and Christianity were tolerated. So when it comes to world history, talking and learning about religious tolerance in different places is very important, and it's important to remember in this specific case these last 2 points, because this will go on for quite a few of the eras that non-Muslims would pay a head tax, not forced to convert, and they have religious tolerance for Judaism and Christianity. So be sure to keep that in mind. This is a picture of the Great Mosque in Damascus, just an example of Islamic architecture and art. The Abbasid dynasty, or the Abbasid Caliphate, came from 750 to 1258 CE. So this was supported by the Mawali and the Shiites, although the Sunni themselves. And the new capital was in Baghdad, which is close to Persia, as we said, current Iran. And this also included the first 100 years golden age of Muslim culture. This was the Renaissance of the Middle East. So the argument between the ulama and the caliph about who should have the final say in religious matters divided a lot of people, as we said, split Islam into sects. So the caliph renounced his final authority in religious matters, and there was a counter-caliph in Cordoba in Spain, and the regional loyalties, problems with Shiites, rise of new dynasties, and the difficulty to control a large empire led to the eventual decline of the Abbasid dynasty, or the Abbasid Caliphate. So the government of the Islam State was based again on the caliphates. The rulers' legitimate power upheld the Sharia law. So Sharia law is the religious law of Islam, which was used in, like, you know how America might have the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. These are laws. The caliphates and the Dar al-Islam held Sharia law, which was the religious law of Islam. So Arab military camps controlled the conquered areas. The non-Muslims, again, it stressed that they paid the head taxes. And after the conquest of Persia, the Abbasids relied on the Persian bureaucrats. So this was taxation of agricultural production, and they adopted the pomp and ceremonies of a Persian court. As for Islamic law, so the Sunnah was the tradition of the Prophet, the Hadith was a collection of the Muhammad's words and deeds, several different strands, and the Quran and Hadith, which were both religious texts of Islam, were the basis for Sharia law. So the Muslim rulers were required to live by and enforce the Sharia law, as American presidents are required to live by and enforce the constitutional law. And Sharia and Islamic law had a unifying effect on the Muslim world. Ibn Battuta could be the judge in Africa as well as in India. So, like it says here, countries under Muslim law were called the Dar al-Islam. So this is a famous traveler, famous Islamic traveler named Ibn Battuta. He spread Islam, and you can see in red is Marco Polo's travels. We know that he's a European traveler, and Ibn Battuta was a Islamic traveler, outlined in green. All right, let's move on. So here are some more questions for you to answer. So it says, describe the first 100 years of Muslim expansion. How far did their empire reach? And what made Muslim armies so successful? How was government organized under the caliphate? What was new about that? What was adopted from previous cultures? And how important was Islamic law? Again, you can go ahead and answer these questions in the Q&A in the chat, or you can keep your hand raised in the participants window, and I will allow you to talk. We can spend about 5 minutes on these questions. Think about what we just went over: the reach of the empire, the success of the Muslim armies, the caliphate, Dar al-Islam, Sharia law, about the continuities in culture of Islam. Any answers, just go ahead. Whatever you think might be the answer, go ahead and put it in the Q&A, in the chat, raise your hand, anything. Think about the last two questions. They are the kind of the guiding questions for this chapter, this unit on spread of Islam. So think about those. Very important, the very important founding principles. Someone said the armies were successful because they treated people with respect. That is correct. Also because it was very unified under Dar al-Islam, under the Sharia law. It had a very unifying effect because everyone was the same religion. They felt a connection with each other. They were able to work together easily. All right. Got someone who raised their hand. Make sure to keep your hand raised if you want to provide an answer. Just whatever answers you've got, whatever you think the answer might be, go ahead and put it in the chat. Any ideas about what the answers to these questions might be? Think about what we just talked about, the Dar al-Islam, Sharia law. Someone said Islamic law was probably important because it was very unified and everyone had to follow it under the Sharia law. Well, the entire basis of Dar al-Islam, it was everyone under the Sharia law, everyone following Islamic law was part of the Dar al-Islam. That was their sort of kingdom, if you might say. That was the caliphate. That was the entire reach of that group, was everyone that followed Islamic law. So you're correct that Islamic law was very, very important because it was, in addition to being their literal guiding principles, it also connected to their religion. Someone said the empire reached all the way to Spain, North Africa, and farther towards the Indus River Valley. That is correct. It was quite a large empire. And also discounting Anatolia, which was occupied by the Byzantine Empire, the Christians. So yes, Spain, North Africa, towards the Indus River Valley, those are all correct. Talking about the Dar al-Islam, let's take a look back at the map. Right here, they've got Spain, the Indus River Valley. We have North Africa, Saudi Arabia. So yes, all correct answers. Okay, so as the Abbasid Caliphate fragmented, there were new Islamic political entities that emerged, and most of them were dominated by the Turkic peoples. So these states demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity. So the Turkic peoples would be the people in Anatolia, in the Byzantine Empire, which would be Christian people. As for political fragmentation, so in the 10th century, the third caliph appeared in Cairo, Egypt, in North Africa, which was the Berbers in the 11th century, and in Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, the Abbasids relied increasingly on Mamluks, which were the people of the area, the Turkic slave soldiers that gained political power, and the Seljuk Turks in the 11th century, who created an empire. They were protectors of the caliphs, but they held de facto political powers. For Turkic dynasties, they had the Turkey and the Holy Land and Syria, which were all crusading states. Think about European history, crusading states, 1099 to 1250 CE, and they did not survive permanently. The Middle East, which were Mongols, 1258. Hold on. Which were Mongols in the 1258 sack of Baghdad and the end of the Caliphate, and the rise of the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. Someone asked, what does de facto mean? That sort of means like makeshift for the time being, kind of. Not for the, it sort of means like makeshift, not really, but they sort of made themselves, they brought themselves into political power, they made themselves powerful, but they weren't the official rulers. All right. And then there was the rise of the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt in the 1250 to 1517 CE, and the Mamluks elite spoke Turkish. They supported Sunni Islam. They presented themselves as defenders of Islam. Oh, there's some spelling errors. And they also had the Iqta system, which landed assignments in return for military services, but it was not hereditary and therefore did not come as part of the government. The Ottoman dynasty was founded by Osman in 1300, and the rise in power made it possible by weakening of the Seljuk Turks dynasty because of the Mongol invasion. So they conquered most of Anatolia and large parts of the Balkans Peninsula by around 400 CE, and they had the use of cannons and a large cavalry. This is a map of the Seljuk Turks, the Fatimids, the Byzantine Empire, Seljuks. You can see how it's all outlined here and how the Seljuk Turks have a great amount of land. So this is as of 1100 CE. You can see Medina and Mecca, two of the holy cities, Cairo, Constantinople, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Caspian Sea, all outlined there. All right, so now we can answer this question. We can take about 5 minutes, think about what we just looked at, and what led to the fragmentation of the Muslim empire. Take a moment, think about this. It's what we just looked over, we just learned. All right, one person said the fact that it was such a big empire, as well as the Mongol invasion. We're not quite yet at the level at the time of Mongol invasions, but it was invasions. But yes, from the Seljuk Turks, control from the Seljuk Turks is what caused the fragmentation of the empire and the fact that it was so large and had such a widespread. All right, on to cities. Good answers. So the new cities and the former military camps were in Baghdad, Basra, Kufa, Fustat, and Kairouan, and they grew because of conversions to Islam and the economic growth. A lot of people really liked the concept of Islam because, number one, it was not class-based, and number two, places in the Islamic State didn't really require you to convert, and lots of people began to move there. So many large cities from Byzantine and Sassanid times, they declined, and centers of Islam included mosques, schools, universities, and centers of production were cloth, metal goods, ceramics, and glass, all of which were very big in the Dar al-Islam. As for the economy, there was international trade dominated by the Muslim merchants. There was a banking system with checks and credit, which were both crucial for long-distance trade. Big cities provided markets for trade, and business partnerships were often started with Jewish and Christian merchants, and they began to form a common currency, which was called the dinar. They still use it today. All right. In Muslim trade routes, here is a map of Muslim trade routes. Here in the blue is sea routes, trade routes along the sea, along the water, and in orange is the land routes. You can see it stretches from East China, goes up into Eastern Europe, goes into Spain, past Saharan Africa, around the Indus River Valley, this whole Middle Eastern area, some of it goes into Italy. This one goes around the Pacific, goes around Indonesia. This one goes all the way to Madagascar. So as you can see, the Dar al-Islam was very big on trade. Now, as for agriculture, so there were lots of independent landowners, large estates that had slaves, tenant farmers, which was included the production for market, which was cash crops, which meant sugar, citrus fruits, cotton, and rice, which was derived from India and China. There was the use of fertilizers, water pumps, mills, and improved irrigation for agriculture, and slaves were used for sugarcane production. So now these are some guiding questions. Analyze trade and economic innovations under the Muslim empires. Analyze the role of cities and give examples of economic production in the Muslim empire. I'll give you some time to answer these questions and then we can talk about our answers. Any answers, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. You can type them up in the Q&A. You can raise your hand. Again, be sure to keep your hand up for a couple seconds so I can see it if you have decided to raise your hand. Any answers? Anyone have any idea of, this is what we just went over, analyzing trade and economic innovations. Think about the trade routes map. Think about the cities. We just talked about how cities were the center of trade. Think about economic production. Think about cash crops. Anything. Anything. Just think like examples of what we just went over. I can go back to the map if you need me to. Just go ahead and let me know. Does anyone think they might have an idea of what might have been going on? Anyone? All right, well, we just went over this. It means analyzing the trade, and we said analyzing trade and economic innovations under the Muslim empires. We can go back and we see how economic innovations included creating one of the first banking systems, creating a common currency, and then we said, what about the role of cities? The role of cities was markets for trade, big centers for production. And for economic, give examples of economic production included right here for production for market, which cash crops, which included sugar, citrus fruits, cotton, and rice that they imported from China and India. So don't be afraid to answer these. It's just don't worry about it at all. It's okay if you get something wrong. All right, moving on. Science and medicine. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad was Greek, Indian, Persian, and Mesopotamian texts translated into Arabic. So does anyone know, does anyone remember what Mesopotamia was? You can go ahead and put that in the Q&A as we move on, if you have any idea. So Ibn al-Haytham, which was the scientific method or the book of optics. They have al-Khwarizmi, which was the algorithms and algebra. Ibn Sina, which was the medical encyclopedia on contagious diseases. And surgeons learned how to disinfect wounds, use surgical instruments, and they were also trained in hospitals. As for technology, there was a lot of transfer between the East and West, which included paper, the astrolabe, compass, the lateen scale, and the decimal system. There was also the production of steel with swords from Damascus. For culture, we talk about women and slaves, which were both the situations of which changed a lot from era to era. So this is something that we're going to keep talking about with each era, with each area that we go over. So the women were veiled and confined to the house already in the Byzantine and the Sassanid times. So there was also the legal protection of women under the Quran. So a woman's soul was considered equal before Allah, but not equality to men, which meant limited divorce rights, keeping dowry if divorced by their husband, women's testimony in court weighs only half of a man's, and men can have up to 4 wives. So slavery was allowed. Slaves from Central Asia, Europe, and Africa, and slaves were used in households, as soldiers, and in agriculture, and it was forbidden to enslave Muslims. Sufism, which was in the 12th and 13th century, which was mystic brotherhoods looking for union with God through rituals, emotional sense of religion, and a personal relationship with Allah. So Sufi saints worshipped in the countryside and important in spreading Islam. They were very important in spreading Islam to other countries, making it more popular. So here is a mosque in Samara, another example of Muslim architecture. The Alhambra in Cordoba. Arches, arabesques, all these beautiful Muslim art. All right, so take a look at this piece of calligraphy as well. It's a bird and this writing shaped like a bird. All right, what cultural contributions are made under the Muslim empires? What earlier cultures had an impact on Muslim culture? And give examples of cultural transfer. So I'll give you a couple minutes to answer this. Just think about this, think about these questions. And then we're going to move on to some sourcing. All right. You can go ahead and give your answer. Someone raised their hand. You can go ahead and talk. You can go ahead and unmute. Give your answer if you'd like to. Oh, okay. So just think about these. We can go over answers in a couple minutes. Think about the earlier cultures before Muslims, what we even talked about last class, with the classical empires, cultural transfers, talking about inventions, anything. What are you thinking of when you think about these questions? Does anybody, what you might think about this, what you might think the answers could be? Any answers? Someone said women and slaves not having as many rights as men. That's correct. Although the the Muslim empires and Islamic culture did not exactly start this. This was something that was consistent throughout much of the history there. So you are correct, but it was not started there. Any examples of a cultural transfer? Think about the inventions that we talked about. All right, someone said the astrolabe. Yes, that was an example of one of the inventions. Cultural transfer, that is correct. Someone said architecture and inventions. Yes, that is also correct. So yes, the cultural contributions made by Muslim empires included a lot of trade-related and trade-related, technology-related, also science and medicine. Science and medicine was very important to the Islamic dynasties. To the Islamic states. It was held in high esteem for they cornerstoned the scientific method. They had books of optics, and they also started a lot. They also founded a lot of mathematical principles, which is like algorithms and the algebra, which was outlined in the Al-Khwarizmi. So the earlier cultures that had an impact on Muslim culture included the, I'm trying to find where it put it, but we talked about how it was the Sassanid and the Byzantine empires. Yeah, the Sassanid and the Byzantine empires greatly affected Muslim culture. And examples of cultural transfer include, yes, the trade, the cash crops, and some of the inventions. All right. So now let's take a look at some documents, and we are going to go ahead and source them. So if you don't remember, I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. And I will type in what all the sourcing words mean. So we have the acronym HIPP. Where the first H stands for historical context. The I stands for intended audience, P stands for point of view, and the last P stands for purpose. So for the first document, think about which of the four. Think about, would you use H, you'd use I, P, the historical context, intended audience, purpose, or point of view. Which one would you use, and how would you source this document? How would you describe that? So you can, again, put that in the Q&A, you can put that in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Make sure to keep it up for a couple seconds so I know to unmute you. Just for document 1 as of now. Document 1 is by the Urban II Pope and King of Rome, the religious leader for Catholics. The following is from a speech at the Council of Clermont, France, in 1095, addressing a great crowd of nobles almost 100 years after the Sultan of Egypt, Al-Hakim, had burned the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It says, "For your brethren who live in the East are in urgent need of your help, and you must hasten to give them the aid. Turks and Arabs have attacked them and have conquered the territory. They have killed and captured many and have destroyed the churches. I beseech you, as church heralds, to persuade all people of whatever rank, foot soldier and knight, poor and rich, to carry aid promptly to those Christians, and to destroy that vile race. All who die by the way, whether by land or by sea, or in battle against the pagans, shall have immediate remission of sins. So think about what's in the text and think about the description above the text and tell me which of the four you would use. Would you use historical context, intended audience, purpose, or point of view for this? Give you a couple more minutes to think about it and put your answers in the chat or in the Q&A. Someone raised their hand. I will. Oh, no, they did not. Okay. Someone said, I, to instruct everyone, poor or rich, said that the intended audience is instructing the poor or rich people, foot soldier, knight, to go fight the Turks and Arabs. So you said, this person said, to instruct everyone, poor or rich, foot soldier, knight, to fight the Turks and Arabs. That sounds more like a purpose. So I think you're correct in your description of it, but I would write purpose. I would describe that as this is the purpose of the text instead of this the intended audience of the text. But you are correct. That is one way you could do it. The purpose would be to tell them to persuade people to go against the Islamic State, to go against the Dar al-Islam, to fight the Turks and Arabs, no matter their level. That is correct. Any others? Okay. You could also use a point of view for this. It's from the point of view of the Christians, of the Catholics, and like we said, point of view is from the point of view of the Christians or Catholics, and they believe that the Turks and Arabs are out to get them. You could say it's the purpose. The purpose is to urge other Christians and Catholics to go against the Islamic peoples. You could say that the intended audience is the rest of the Christians whom they are urging to go against the Islamic peoples. And I would try not to use historical context for a text document because that would be a little bit difficult to do. All right. This is slightly longer, but you can go ahead, take a look at this, tell me which of the four you would use for this: historical context, intended audience, purpose, or point of view. Again, if you're not sure what those mean or if you just forgot them, they're in the chat and you can see I've listed out the HIPP. So for this particular document, again, since it's a text document, I would try to keep away from using historical context. As for the intended audience is more informative. It seems like it's trying to ties in with the purpose. It seems like it's trying to convince others that God is important, that you should follow the word of God. The point of view is, it shows again the Muslim Sultan of Delhi, so you would say a Muslim person who is very in touch with their religion. We'll take a look at a couple more. So document 3 is by Saladin the Sultan of Egypt from a speech to his people before his attack on Jerusalem in 1187, which drove the Crusaders from the city for the first time in nearly 100 years. And it says, "If God blesses us by enabling us to drive his enemies out of Jerusalem, how fortunate and happy we would be. For Jerusalem has been controlled by the enemy for 91 years, during which time God has received nothing from us here in the way of adoration. At the same time, the zeal of Muslim rulers to deliver it languished. Time passed, and so did many generations, while the Franks succeeded in rooting themselves strongly there. Now God has reserved the merit of its recovery for one house, the house of the sons of Ayub, which were Saladin's family, in order to unite all hearts in appreciation." Think about, would you use H, I, P, or P? Historical context, intended audience, purpose, or point of view. For this one, again, text document, you try to stay away from using historical context. Intended audience would be for talking to it says a speech to his people, so he's talking to the other Islamic peoples. Someone said P, purpose. Yes, purpose would definitely work. You would want to talk about the purpose is to convince them that the Crusaders are bad, to convince them the Crusaders have committed fallacies against them and they should be fighting against them. And the point of view would be from someone who is against the Crusaders, someone who believes strongly in their religion and believes that Christians should be driven out. All right. Now let's take a look at this. So here is hold on just a minute. Here is what will be your homework for this week. This is going to be a very, very useful chart. It will really, really help you when you're writing your DBQs, when you're writing your essays, when you're doing your short answer questions and taking your tests. So all this outlines is your Islam and cultural encounter. It talks about South Asia, India, Anatolia, West Africa, and Spain, and the spread of Islam, political impact, cultural impact, and interactions. And then we've got a quick question at the end that says, compare and contrast the effects and spread of Islam in two regions and write a thesis statement. So I will be putting this on the drive. You can go ahead, grab it from there, and just answer these in quick bullet points. Make sure you get the major ideas down. Okay, that's just about it for today. So does anyone have any questions? Any questions about anything we learned today? Any questions about the homework? Anything at all? No questions? So no questions at all from anyone. All right.